to my channel. This is Prepping by Faith. Before I get started on this video, I just wanted to let you guys know I did go ahead and purchase a mic. I've had several people complaining about the sound level, saying that it isn't loud enough, that they can't hear me. So I did go ahead and it is included in this video. I listened to what you guys were saying. I'm trying to make this video as easy for you guys to hear and understand as possible. So if you guys would comment for me if this is going to work a lot better and you guys can hear me better, I would greatly appreciate it. So what I want to talk to you guys about today is the 4 S's of preparedness. And this is just something that I've been thinking about. It's something that I put together. It's not something that I've really heard in the prepping community. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is something that I've pieced together. And you might be wondering, why do I even need to know about the 4 S's of preparedness? Why is this important? And I think that from a standpoint of really being honest with ourselves on where we're at in our level of preparedness, I think it is important that we identify that area. So that way we can make strides for improvements. We can really start to hold ourselves accountable. Now, obviously, there are things that are going to take place that may stop you or hinder you from being able to get to certain levels, whether that is, physical restrictions, or you've got situations with your health that are impacting you, or monetary, because we are entering a period of time where everything has gotten excessively expensive and there are only so many finances to go around, right? So I'm not talking about those things, but I'm talking about really holding ourselves accountable so that we can advance into these next levels. So for me, let's start off with number one. Number one to me is shock. And to me, that is where you finally notice what's going on around you. You awaken from that state of slumber that you've been in, where you just assumed that the world was as we've been shown, right? So this is where you start understanding that in order for your family to be well taken care of, that you have to take on that responsibility and that you have to be your own advocate and make that happen. So this is where you start doing some research, you start understanding the bigger issues at hand, you understand the global implications and your local implications, and how something as minor as a natural disaster and how that could impact you in your area, and that the government is not always going to be there to help rescue you in these situations, and that you have to take accountability and start making those steps for yourself. So coming out of that situation, really starting to do your research, starting to do your homework, beginning to formulate a plan for your family, figuring out goals for yourself so that you can start getting prepared, identifying what your areas of weakness are, what areas you need to be preparing in, your food, your water, your security, your power, your heating, your cooking sources, your medical, all those things, your light sources, identifying all those areas of weakness and start formulating plans. So number 2 for me is stack. And that is where you begin acquiring all of your goods. You start putting everything away. You've really done your homework. You've identified what you need. And so you're making those things happen. You've set yourself goals every month. I'm not talking about going out and just blowing through your 401k or your savings or your retirement or anything like that to begin to acquire the things that you need. I'm talking about you have set realistic goals. You are going out, weekly, monthly, whatever it is. You've budgeted and you're acquiring those things that you need to put away in your home, especially, food and water and those sorts of things, getting those things in order. And I feel like for many in the community, this is probably the level that we remain at, right? We have gotten really good at stacking those things that we think that we're going to need, and we're good at acquiring those items, but many times those items just remain in those boxes and they stay on those shelves and they don't really get used. And some people are not as good at rotating out of their food preps as possible, so they have things that are coming up on dates that they're not getting to. And I'm not saying that I'm not guilty of some of this stuff myself, guys. So I want you to understand that. I'm never going to tell you do things that I'm not doing. I've learned a lot of things along the way. I mean, one of the things I shared with you guys is that I definitely acquired too many canned goods at the same time frame back in 2020, and that was a mistake on my part, not thinking about the fact that all of those dates were going to be the same date. So we make mistakes and we learn from them, right? They're not failures, they're just lessons learned, and that's something that I talk a lot about on my channel. But what I want us to do is really start building on to at least the third level. And for me, the third level of preparedness is skills. So skills. So we're taking those things out of the boxes. We're really working with them. We're getting to know what gear works for us and what gear doesn't work for us. We're taking the time to, take a medical class, learn our basic CPR and first aid, get some of that training. We are learning how to cook and prepare meals from scratch, not everything from prepackaged and canned goods. We're learning to get more hands-on. We're learning to start our fires. We're learning to, put up our tents. We're learning some of those necessary bushcrafting skills. We are going to the range and practicing. We are working on our communications and, taking our ham radios and things out of the boxes. And, obviously you can't practice with those in depth unless you go ahead and get licensed, but at least familiarizing yourself. We are going through those manuals and we are learning and reading about different things that we want to learn about as far as what we would need to survive. So we are actually taking those books that we've acquired during our stacking and we're reading them, and then we're applying that with hands-on practice, because the only way that we're really going to learn is if we're willing to get hands-on and start really digging in and applying that knowledge. Because if we have book knowledge, that's wonderful, but sometimes when you actually go to do these things, they don't work exactly the way that you think they are going to. We can have an idea in our mind, but actually practicing with that is more of that reality aspect. So this is where I want all of us to at least start striving, is to start acquiring those necessary skills to, survive in a crisis. And so for me, number 4 is when we become, it is sustain. So sustain. We are not just surviving a crisis, we are thriving in that crisis. And for me, this is where we have kind of mastered our skills. We have all of those basic skills. We don't have to be completely, mastered in every skill, because I don't think that is a possibility. I think we're all naturally gifted in certain things. We gravitate towards certain things, and our talents are in different areas, but we at least have that basic hands-on in the majority of these areas that we need to really thrive in a crisis. And where we are weak in other areas, we have reached out, we are formulating our group, our mag, so that we have strengths across the board. Wherever we're weak, somebody else might be stronger in, and we're able to really form that group and start working on the essence of building a community, so that when we are faced with a crisis, we're not just relying on ourselves. So that is what I'm thinking about as far as sustain. And anything that's thrown our way, we might feel a little bit momentarily overwhelmed, because that's human nature, but we're able to push through that, and we're able to recognize, we are mentally strong, we're spiritually strong, we're physically strong. And we know that we can sustain ourselves through that crisis. And what that looks like for some and what that looks like for others might be different, There's all this notion sometimes, I think, in the community that, if you're in a more densely populated area, that there is no way for you to really thrive in that crisis. And sometimes, I understand the thought process, but I do have to disagree on certain levels. Selko Begovic is a prime example of this, where he lived through the Bosnian War, and he was in more of a city atmosphere, and he came out the other side, and he was able to, he went through a lot of difficulties during that situation, but he was able to mentally, physically, and spiritually get himself through that crisis and come out the other side. So it is a possibility. It might be a lot harder, and then in some instances it might be easier. It just depends on what circumstance you're faced with, right? So I think that we need to get our minds wrapped around these concepts. There are different, everyone's in a different set of circumstances. So what that sustain looks like for you and what it looks like for somebody else, it might be a little bit different. Now, obviously, I feel like the end goal would be if we could get ourselves some property and we could really start, getting more into that homesteading where we could start growing our food, you know. But if you're in an apartment and you can't do all of that, that's okay too. You can at least learn to grow some things on your balcony, or you can start to do some indoor gardening, whatever it is. You know, here I am, I'm in the suburbs, as many of you know. I can't just pick up and move right now in my situation either. So we are making plans. We have raised beds we're going to be installing. We're going to have these things ready to go for next spring so that we can start planting more things in those and really learning those critical gardening skills, because I think growing our food is one of those things that's really going to be important going forward. But taking these things a step further, understanding where your clean water is going to come from, where you have good viable sources of water that you're going to be able to filter out, I think is really critical as well. I mean, in my area, I do have a couple different reservoirs that are within access. It's going to take me, you know, more trek to get there, but we do, as I stated before, have groundwater that we can access. But the other thing with that too is understanding how do we properly dispose of waste. We would also have to consider everybody else around us, and if they were not properly disposing of that waste, they would contaminate the groundwater. So even though I want to be able to utilize that, I may not be able to, depending on how bad the crisis gets or how far it gets. And you need to be thinking about these things and strategizing, how am I going to handle this if this happens? So you need to be able to pivot, and you need to be able to really maneuver you know, mentally when it comes to a lot of this stuff. Don't get stuck on one scenario and think that that's exactly how it's going to be, because when it comes to preparedness, we understand that there are so many curveballs that can get thrown at us, and nothing ever ends up being exactly like we think it's going to be, right? It isn't a movie, it isn't a book, this is real life. And so we need to come to terms with that and really understand that. So those are my 4 S's for preparedness, guys, that I wanted to share with you. Just a little insight. I wanted us to start holding ourselves accountable and really digging into what that means to us, where we think we're at, and what we can do to get to that next level of our preparedness. So if you guys have enjoyed this video today, please give me a like, share, and subscribe. And remember to pray, prep, and put God first. God bless.